Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's class. We are going to be studying a case study today that has been written by Stanford Business School on Zappos.com. I hope all of you are doing very well. So without further ado, I am going to just start talking to you a little bit about Zappos. And the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is what this company is all about. And so it's a story, right? Like case studies, as you all know, are always stories. And this story dates back to 1999. And in this story, there is a gentleman. The gentleman's name in the main, one of the main characters in this story, his name is Nick Swinburne. And Nick, in 1999, decided to go one day. He was just an ordinary shoe buyer. So he went to a store and he went to the store and he was a bit disappointed. He wasn't really able to find, what he was looking for in terms of the shoe size, the color, the style, all of those things. And so he came back home and kind of contemplated. And at that time in 1999, there was an internet boom in the United States. And so there were a lot of online companies opening up. And so what Nick thought was, hey, why not start an online shoe company? And at that time, he kind of came up with the word Zappos, for this internet online shoe company. And just to let you know, this word that he kind of concocted himself came from the Spanish word zapatos, which is in Spanish, it means shoes. So that's where he, this idea kind of just came to him. And so that's the story. When the case study starts, they kind of just talked a little bit about how the idea of Zappos was originated. And then they kind of moved forward about 9 years ahead in time. And by 2008, they kind of talk about how this company that Nick founded in 1999 became a $1 billion company in terms of annual profit, just in less than 10 years, right? So it was obviously a huge success. However, when Nick initially in 1999 used to talk about, this whole idea, it was faced with a lot of skepticism, and very few people really bought into the idea and thought that it would work. By 2008, even though Zappos was making $1 billion in profits, they really realized that they still had a huge untapped customer base and that only 3% of the US population was their customer. So they really, realized that there was just tremendous potential. Obviously by 2008, again, I just want to reiterate in the beginning, nobody believed in this idea and everybody kind of thought it's going to fail. One thing that if you look at the history of this company, throughout it was, funding, it was not lavishly funded. Right from the get-go, money was tight for Zappos, and that actually became a strength because they always kind of looked at lean methods to, functions, how to keep their costs down. All of these things were things that they really thought about doing because money was tight. It wasn't easy to come by for them. In general, the management of Zappos always wanted to give Zappos management always wanted to give a wow experience to its customers, suppliers, and affiliates. And what does this wow experience mean? Well, it wanted to exceed expectations. It wanted to give service that was better than any other company in the market. Zappos, one of the reasons we are studying it in the supply chain management course is that it really evolved its supply chain management. And eventually, its supply chain management became a source of excellence, and they were known in the market because of their supply chain management practices. Of course, there were, and another big thing about to notice in this case study is about how Zappos was continuously improving itself. And so the whole Kaizen concept really plays in beautifully at this company that was forever really pushing itself to really grow and improve throughout its journey. So next, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, how did this company raise capital? Because as you know, I mean, to do any business, you do need money. And Nick didn't have necessarily a lot of money. So for this business, what Nick did was he raised $150,000 from friends and family. And he also hired a gentleman by the name of Fred Mosler, and he was a senior shoe buyer at Nordstrom. And so Nick said, look to this friend of his, Fred, like, why don't you join hands with me? You obviously know a lot about the shoe industry, what to buy, what customers are really looking for. So they made a team together. But this $150,000 wasn't really enough to make this company take it to where it needed to be. So they started they started facing a lot of difficulty, financial difficulty. And so what Nick did was he started approaching venture capital funds. And so, venture capital funds are funds that invest in new businesses. And so he approached a couple, and then, he was just going down a list. One of the companies that he called and left a voice message for was known as Venture Frogs. And he left the voice message, didn't hear back from them for a few days, but actually a few days later, they did reach out to him and they did decide to invest in their company and become partners. But just to tell you a little bit about this venture capital fund, there were two people that were leading this venture capital fund. The first gentleman's name is Tony. And Tony, basically, at one point, he had a very successful internet advertising company, and he was able to sell this advertising company to Microsoft. He became very rich because he was able to sell his firm for $265 million in 1998 when he was just 24 years old. And Alfred Lin was his friend and also his partner at Venture Frogs. And they had both met each other at Harvard, where they were studying. And so when they got this phone call from Nick about, investing in his firm, initially they were a little skeptical, they weren't sure, but they did a little bit of research. And one of the facts that they found was that the entire US shoe market was a pretty big market. It was a $40 billion market. And that 5% of the business, the shoe business, was being done through mail order. And what does this mean? Well, what it means is that a lot of people were actually just looking at catalogs. 5% of people of the whole market, shoe market, 5% would look at catalogs, find a picture of a shoe that they like, and placed an order by mail. So they kind of realized that, look, there is that 5% of people that are okay by just looking at pictures and ordering shoes. So they decided to take a calculated kind of a bet on Zappos. And so they said, they called Nick back and they said, look, we're ready to invest $2 million into the company. And also Tony also personally, in addition to the 2 million, he also personally invested in Zappos. There was one other company by the name of Sequentia Capital that also invested in Zappos. So, after getting like these three sources of funding, Even then, Zappos just had, about $10 million. So they weren't like, this wasn't a huge amount of money for the kind of business that they wanted to do, because remember, Zappos wanted to be like all across the US, shoe provider, right? An online business that's for the whole of the US. So they were a little strapped for cash, but as I mentioned just a little while ago, that was fine, because they had to think creatively about doing their business in a very cost-effective way. One of the things that was a huge advantage for Zappos was that there was no competition in this area. There was no other company that was doing an online shoe business. So that was a huge benefit for them. So the way it worked out was that, in 2000, when, Nick and Tony both decided to become co-CEOs. So Nick, remember, was the founder, and Tony was, one of the partners in the venture capital fund. And later on, Lynn also joined them as a CFO, and they added roles of chief operating officer and chairman. But eventually, after about 6 years, the founder, Nick, decided to leave, and both of the partners of the venture capital firm continued to really operate this business. And if you want to just kind of have a look at Zappos's revenue growth, this gives you a fantastic, paints a beautiful picture from the year 2000 to 2008. You can see a very steady increase in revenue. Most of the success of Zappos really came from repeat customers. So they were, from just like 2004 to 2008, the amount of repeat customers grew from 45% to 75%. And, this was great, right? People were very happy with the service. They kept coming back. And as you all know, one of the best sources of marketing is word of mouth. So they had a lot of satisfied customers that decided to come back again and again to Zappos and gave them further business. Big part of their cost was actually mailing, because that was about 17% of their gross sales. Was pretty much constant. So obviously they were saving a lot of costs, because they didn't have to have a whole, shop, and they didn't have to have a separate warehouse and all of that. But at the same token, they did have the mail costs. So, but despite those mail costs, they did have a lot of financial success. All right. Now, just a little bit about the structure of this company. So the company had, in 2008, the company had about 1,500 employees, and they had 9 million customers. So a lot of customers. And the way they in 2008, just to give you a little bit of an idea, they had half of their employees in Nevada, which was their call center, and the remaining half was in their fulfillment center. So the orders were being placed in one location, and the fulfillment center in Kentucky, that's where the orders were actually being sent out to customers. So that was the basic setup of the company. So one of the company's biggest competitive strengths and advantages became its wow strategy. And so the whole idea of going above and beyond expectations became really, something that the management really emphasized. And when they delivered, that is what set them apart in the market. So they basically, gave very quick delivery. They would try to under-promise and over-deliver. And they, this kind of behavior really helped with customer retention. Initially, they had a 60-day return policy, but eventually they made it a 365-day return policy. So if somebody ordered shoes and they didn't like them, they had a year to return the shoes. Returns really, became added up to 35% of sales. But again, for the company, it was worth it. Something that Tony, the CEO, said was that, look, Zappos is a service company that sells shoes. So the emphasis was on service, being a top-notch service company. And they really felt that customer service was an investment. It was not an expense. They would make sure that all customer calls were answered within 20 seconds. And, if somebody called, let's say, and they didn't have the right shoe, well, the call center representatives would go above and beyond. They would even go to different companies' websites to try and find what the customer was looking for. And that gives you an idea of the superior type of service that they were being able to provide. In general, one of the things that became a little bit tricky for the company was that, they initially said that they are going to be delivering the next day. Now, this was great because in many cases they were able to deliver the next day, but sometimes they weren't able to. So what they did was they changed their strategy a little bit, and they said that it's going to take 5 days for shoes to reach customers. So again, they wanted to under promise and over deliver. So usually they would, they aim to still give the shoes within a day, but this was just something that they had to do. They had to change their strategy a little bit. And this helped them regain the wow factor. Because customers felt like, look, they said it would reach in 5 days, but wow, they sent it in a day. So that's just something, that's just smart thinking from the management point of view. There were a lot of new items. Whenever new items would come in, and there were a lot of new items because they wanted to bring in the latest and greatest for their customers. They would make sure that for each shoe that was being put up on the website, there were a lot of photos, a minimum of 8 photos from different angles. And they had a very detailed description of the shoes, and they would have customer feedback on each of the shoes. And all of this feedback would really help customers choose the shoes that they wanted to buy. So there was, however, one big aspect that I did mention about the shipping costs and the mailing costs. And so while the ROI was increasing, the shipping cost was still high. So that's something that was a challenge for them to really think about ways to reduce the whole mailing / shipping costs of shoes to their customers. So next, I'm going to talk about the development and evolution of Zappos' operations. And, and then soon after, this is going to build into or merge into their supply chain operations as well. So let me start off, however, by talking to you about their call center, because the call center was where they were getting a lot of their orders. Now, just to be very clear, 95% of their orders were coming in by the website. However, there were 5% of people who were calling into the call center to place orders. And they had, originally they had a call center in San Francisco in 2000, but in 2004, they moved it to Nevada. And obviously for cost reasons, Nevada is a lot cheaper. And in Nevada, they had a 24/7, round the clock call center. And everybody in the call center got a lot of training. So they had, 4 weeks of new hire training, and then another 2 weeks of call center training. And everybody was told that, look, you have to go above and beyond customer expectation. And they were, there was a philosophy that every interaction with the customer is really a branding opportunity. all calls that were being, incoming calls were being monitored by the company just to check for quality. Now, one of the things that the company originally faced a little bit of difficulty was really attracting good brands that want to be, have their product put up on the website, on the Zappos website. Initially, and especially in the 1990s, there was a lot of distrust on the internet. People were wondering whether this website is legitimate, whether it will really survive. In the first year of operations, they just had about, they had about 60 brands sign up, but it took a lot of work. People, initially some of the stores felt that by putting their product on the Zappos website, their brand equity might go down and their brand might be impacted. However, over a period of time, there was in general a little bit more confidence build up for having goods on the internet. And what happened around this time was also there were a lot of counterfeit shoes coming into the market. And so a lot of companies felt like, hey, it's in order to deal with all of these counterfeit shoes, it's better that those counterfeit shoes were being advertised online. So they felt that it was better that they actually got their foot in the door in the online market through Zappos. And so that's what they did. Also, what the higher end brands said was that, they should have a separate, website for higher end brands. And so that's what Zappos did. They started building vertical sites. And by 2003, and one of the vertical sites that they built was known as Couture. And so this was for, really expensive brands that people wanted. So in general, over a period of time, customers became very impressed with the level of service and quality that Zappos was really bringing to them. And brands became very happy to really be part of Zappos, and customers actually started asking for Zappos to really start carrying not only shoes, but other goods as well. And so there was a demand for them to carry electronic products, clothing, luggage, jewelry, household goods, and a whole plethora of other items. And, one thing was that, the employees were very happy at Zappos because the culture was like very interactive, very, they kind of very innovative. They encouraged their employees to really be passionate about what they were doing. And this kind of really fueled the expansion into different areas because, the employees really wanted to help the business grow, and they were happy to see the business grow. So I think this really goes to show that, it was a very top-down kind of positive culture that of this wow. And so it wasn't just this wow experience, wasn't just external for customers, but it was also internally being manifested amongst all the employees. So next, I want to talk to you about the evolution of Zappos' supply chain. And, as I mentioned just a couple slides ago, Zappos' supply chain is something that did become its competitive advantage and strength. And so they, however, had to really move from a traditional model, and they had to try many different models before they were able to really find their niche. And so in the traditional model, usually a customer would place an order with Zappos, and Zappos would then contact the manufacturer and say, look, can you please send this? I just got this order on our website. Can you please dispatch this order to the customer? And so Zappos would charge like a small service fee. And so a payment would be made to the manufacturer. So Zappos was kind of right here in the middle an intermediary between the customer and manufacturer. And this model is also known as the drop ship model, where this customer intermediary, the Zappos, is just taking the order and having it placed at the manufacturer, and the manufacturer sends the goods to the customer. So basically you can see these arrows, customer placing an order at Zappos, Zappos sends that information to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer then sends the shoe or the good that was ordered to the customer. And again, this is known as the drop ship model, and it has many advantages because for Zappos, they don't need to own any warehouse, they don't need to own any inventory costs, and they really, they just is very just a very small order fulfillment cost that they incur. However, there are some disadvantages of the drop shipping because number one, inventory of what is available is being updated manually. So let's say, on the Zappos' website, the manufacturer told Zappos that they had 5 shoes in the morning. Well, maybe those 5 shoes all got sold out, and Zappos wasn't really told that the manufacturer's inventory has gone down in real time. And so if many times people would place order for that shoe, and when Zappos would send it to the manufacturer, the manufacturer would come back and say, no, sorry, we don't have that shoe available anymore. So this inventory information was a major gap. And also Zappos would never know when the order was actually sent out. So they didn't know when the order was dispatched, and this was creating problems. So there was no record. So Zappos wanted that shoes are being sent, the next day, but manufacturers, they weren't necessarily always as quick as Zappos wanted them to be. So Zappos decided to do something, take some big, make some big changes, and they decided to bring the inventory in-house. And by doing so, and they said that, okay, now we are not going to trust the manufacturer anymore. We're going to take on their inventory, bring it in-house. And so what they had to do is they first had to find a big physical store where they could put, all this inventory, right? So they made a store in California, and eventually, they converted it into this huge warehouse and distribution center. And the problem, however, with this site in California was that they really didn't have any airports close by. And so it became really expensive to ship things. And so this whole idea of bringing inventory in-house really didn't work out for them. They realized that, look, their costs are still way too high. So then what they did was they decided to make a third-party fulfillment agreement with UPS. And so in 2001, they basically reached out to UPS and they said, look, can you own the inventory? And can you manage, all of our orders? We will give you the orders. We'll let you know what orders are coming in, but can you just then send them out from your own, warehouses, UPS warehouses? But, after 6 to 8 weeks, initially, the UPS was happy to sign up for it. But within 6 to 8 weeks, both UPS and Zappos realized that this is not going to be a sustainable agreement because there were just too many SKUs, too many shoes, too many styles. And UPS had a very hard time managing that. At that time, just to give you an idea, Zappos had about 70,000 to 80,000 SKUs. So managing that kind of inventory was just really overwhelming for UPS as well. So finally, what Zappos decided to do was they decided to move to Kentucky now and build a huge, warehouse. And this time they decided to make it very close to, a UPS facility center so that they could send things out, ship things out very quickly. So it was just half an hour away from the UPS facility. And this time they learned, right? They really learned from their past experiences. They used automation. They use scanners, and they really, this time they got a huge warehouse. So it was 832,000 square feet. They had automated conveyors and carousels. And so they decided that they wanted to manage the inventory and that they wanted to do it in a really, really efficient and effective way. And interestingly, Tony himself designed a lot of the different automation tools, like warehouse management tools that were used by the company. So he was also an engineer, and so that was a very interesting coincidence. So eventually there was, this whole drop shipping, that had initially, the whole traditional model was finished. In the middle, they had been continuing to do a little bit of drop shipping, but once they totally moved to this Kentucky distribution center, and they realized that it's working and it's working well, they stopped doing the whole drop shipment arrangement that they originally had in the traditional model. Now, a little bit more about their supply chain management. The shoes that were being bought, all the buying was being done at traditional trade shows. So the way it works is, there's a huge trade show held, about 6 months before any shoes enter the market. All buyers from various companies come to the trade show, and at that trade show, all the new styles are shown, they're displayed, and people will basically place orders. So, what Zappos did was, especially when they started building their own inventory and things like that, they decided to employ up to 100 different merchandisers, and they started going and buying at these trade shows. So that's how they would own the whole inventory, right? So they would actually buy the product, place these orders at trade shows, and buy the product, keep it in their own inventory. And yeah, and they also had, they made a program known as Extranet, and this basically also helped vendors. Additionally, once Zappos really had its technology design, retail website, call center, and distribution system in place, and once they really optimized their whole solution, online solution, they did really two things. The first thing is they had an expansionary policy. So they purchased a discount online retailer, but known as 6PM. But they also developed a program known as Powered by Zappos. And so what they did was they agreed to run e-commerce businesses for various brands online. And so if you went to the website, it would be under the name of the company, but somewhere on the website, it would say Powered by Zappos. So this was something that they did. And as a result, what happened is they developed a supply chain web. And on this slide, you can kind of see, they had so many various suppliers that they were working with, where they would get, orders. And then they were also getting customer orders to the fulfillment center, and from various different people. So it was not only Zappos.com, 6PM that they owned, but a lot of other e-commerce websites that they were running the business, their e-commerce business for. And so all of this was, all of these orders were being fulfilled from the Kentucky Fulfillment Center, and they were being sent out by UPS to the customer. So that's basically Zappos's supply chain web, and all of this information is from this one is Exhibit 3 from the appendix in the case study. Now, one thing that Zappos did have a little difficulty with was scheduling product deliveries. So they had more than 1,400 brands, delivering goods in their warehouse. So this was a very difficult from a traffic management point of view. And there was basically a high degree of, uncertainty of a shipment, of when things are going to be arriving into the warehouse. And so there was a lot of inefficiency in the warehouse operations. And this is something that Zappos really and the management tried very hard to overcome. But it was a challenge for them. Another challenge for them was dealing with excess inventory. And so, generally speaking, what they decided to do was they had a policy. And according to the policy, if a good was not being able to be sold in 60 days, they would then give it a markdown or a discount. And so basically they would give a discount, but they wouldn't give too big of a discount. So maybe, something up to 25% discount. But beyond that, they did not want to give a discount. And the reason is they didn't want that brands feel that, their goods are being sold at very cheap throwaway prices. And they didn't want to hurt, the company, various companies' brand equity. So what they did was that things were not being sold despite the markdowns, they would then send it to discount or outlet stores. And these could also be, things like 6 p.m. and overstock that were also, online discount stores. And as you know, 6 p.m. is something that they owned. So in general, it wasn't that, they were constrained to it wasn't like they had a store and that they were constrained for space, but at the same time, they didn't want to keep holding on to slow moving goods. So that's what their strategy was. And yep, so that's basically so the two things that they were facing difficulty with again was the dealing with excess inventory, for which they developed quite a good strategy, and also the incoming goods that came into their warehouse. So now the case study kind of moves on and talks a lot about opportunities for improvement. And so definitely one of the opportunities for improvement was inbound, the goods that are coming in to the company, to the warehouse. And so also there was inefficiency in the overall supply chain reaching back to the shoe producer. So sometimes, things were there were delays from the factory or the people that were supposed to give them goods. So that was another area that they kind of found challenging. Also, both for inbound and outbound goods, many times the truckloads that would come in were partially filled. And so this led to, this wasn't really the most optimum way to transport goods. And so these were just some areas of, that were challenges for the company. Now, next, I'm going to talk just a little bit about, the quest for expansion and, what were the issues? Did they expand? Did they not expand? So Zappos, one of the things that was brought to the table was expanding to Canada and, basically making a similar website in Canada. But they realized that, look, it wouldn't be that easy to do that because the culture was very different in Canada. And also they would need a lot of inventory and they would need to really, get a whole other space. It would be very difficult. So they kind of, it was on the cards, but they kind of stalled this international expansion in 2008. Some other things to really keep in mind. In 2008, the growth margins and, were kind of beginning to shrink just a little bit. And labor was beginning to get more expensive. And another big economic, kind of challenge for them was that there were more competitive websites. so, customers began to like search other websites before just coming to Zappos.com. That was, prior to 2008, that was not the case. They would just always kind of, come straight to Zappos. Finally, in this presentation, I just kind of wanted to quickly show you some other exhibits from the case study. The top 10 internet websites of 2007, in 2007. So these are just, gives you a good example. A lot of these are still with us today. Amazon.com definitely being way at the top. And and of course, there have been some changes, but in general, the whole e-commerce business has been growing, has been increasing. And here you can also see on this exhibit, you can see the income statement data for Zappos, Amazon, and Nordstrom. And here you can see, the revenue and Zappos being, in the millions, whereas Amazon and Nordstrom being much bigger, much more established brands. But still, actually, if you look at it, the gross margin percentage, pretty high, right? 35%. So after higher than Amazon, which is great. And the annual revenue growth, again, much higher than Nordstrom. So overall, Zappos, it's in 2008, though it was facing challenges, it had quite a beautiful story of what all it was able to accomplish in 9-year time frame, which is basically the time frame that is covered in this case study. And with that, I come to the conclusion of this case study. I think some things to really take away is, how agile Zappos was, and how agile startups need to be to basically find their niche. And once they find it, they really can thrive. And this is a success story, which I think everybody can learn from. And also just, looking at their supply chain and how they've made it one of, of their big competitive advantages. So with that, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you very much for joining me. And I hope you enjoy this case study. Take care. Bye.